The ShopBot desktop can cut through wood, metal, or plastic, depending on what bits you're using. For our purposes, we're going to be cutting wood. Now, in order to get accurate cuts, we want our material to lay perfectly flat and level, and we also want a buffer between our material and the aluminum bed of the machine. So that means we need to make what's called a spoilboard. A spoilboard is just a sacrificial piece of material that sits on top of the bed in which you can affix your material that you're working on to. And while you can calibrate the bit to stop cutting precisely where your material ends and the spoilboard begins, sometimes you may want to plunge a bit further, and the spoilboard will prevent the bit from chewing up the aluminum bed of the machine. ShopBot includes a handy spoilboard cutting file. All you need to provide is the actual material, an 18 by 24 piece of 3/4 inch MDF. Now, because this is the first thing we're ever going to cut on this machine, this operation will require a lot more steps than your typical cutting project, so bear with us. First off, we need some way of temporarily holding the spoilboard in place while the machine cuts some permanent mounting holes into it. So for this first operation, ShopBot includes these thumb screws, washers, and weld nuts, or T-slot nuts. We place the spoilboard to be onto the bed, roughly centered and in landscape orientation. Then we slide the weld nuts and thumb screws into the track and tighten the board down at the edges using a hex key. With CNC milling, it's crucial for both safety and accuracy that the piece cannot move at all, so be sure to check that it's fastened securely. Next, we install a bit. This project calls for a 1/4 inch end mill, and we zero the Z-axis as we showed in an earlier video in this series. Then, using the keyboard, we manually drive the spindle until the bit is roughly over the lower left corner of the material. By placing it there, we can now easily tell the computer that this location is 0, 0 for X and Y. Now that we've done that, this 18 by 24 area corresponds with the cutting area in the file that ShopBot's prepared. Finally, we set the spindle speed to the appropriate setting, which in this case is 14,000 RPM, and that corresponds with a spindle frequency of 230. Again, in a separate video, we'll explain how to calculate these figures for different materials and bits. Now we're ready to run the cutting file. As you can see, this is making a lot of dust. The dust collection would be a lot better with the dust foot mounted, but we've left it off here so you can see the cutting action. When the file has run its course, the machine automatically returns the spindle to the XY0 position. Now we'll use the control software to drive the spindle back and out of the way so that we can access the piece. Since we had the dust foot off, I'll hit it with a vacuum. Next, we'll undo the screws and remove the piece. Now you can see it's cut these little pockets into the spoilboard, which we'll use to hold the mounting screws that will fasten it to the aluminum deck. But since this particular cutting file is designed not to let the bit go all the way through the material, which would damage the aluminum deck, we'll finish drilling the holes out manually. Now the mounting bolts are 1/4-20, so a 5/16 inch bit will allow for a good fit. Okay, time to mount the spoilboard to the machine. To make things a little easier, I'm just going to use a red magic marker to mark the location of the holes onto the aluminum bed of the machine. The weld nuts slide into the track. The board goes on top, and then we line the mounting bolts up with the weld nuts. Don't tighten the mounting bolts all the way just yet. We want to position the board first. To do that, let's send the spindle over to the machine's natural XY0 point by clicking on that button in the software. Then we'll slide the spoilboard over so that the lower left corner is underneath the bit. Eyeballing it is good enough. Then we'll drive the spindle out of the way and start tightening the board down into its final position. There's just 2 simple steps left, and we'll show you that in the next video.